Hey everybody, welcome back to another review, and this time we are talking about Fantastic Four numbers 52 through 54, which is from 1966, and you might be wondering, why are we talking about Fantastic Four? And more importantly, why is Steve talking about Fantastic Four? He's not a guy that likes those comics. We've never heard him mention those characters before. What does he care about Fantastic Four? And with those questions, you're absolutely right, because I don't care about Fantastic Four. They're not characters I really follow. I read stuff here and there, but they're not really my bag. But we're going back to the original run on that book by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby with these 3 specific issues to talk about the first appearance of Black Panther. Black Panther is not a character I ever knew anything about. He was one of those characters that was always kind of around when I was reading Avengers comics or when I was reading Captain America, or even later when he sort of became Daredevil for a while. I didn't read that stuff, but I knew it was happening. Black Panther has always kind of been peripherally around things, and I never got into him for whatever reason. And then we had the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes TV series, and I think he's my favorite character on that show. The voice acting, his character model, his dialogue, everything you saw in that show with that character, I just absolutely loved. I thought he was fantastic. And I started going in and researching him a little bit. It took me a while to actually start reading him, but I went in and started researching him a little bit, and I kind of figured that Black Panther is basically Thor meets Captain America, or you could also stretch and say he's Marvel's version of Batman, although I think a lot of characters get that label. People think Iron Man is Marvel's Batman, people think Daredevil is Marvel's Batman. I could see Black Panther being the case of being Marvel's Batman in his methodology, in his wealth, in his demeanor. I can see him fitting that mold more than Tony Stark and more than Daredevil. But I still think the better explanation is that he's Captain America meets Thor, because he's royalty. There's a Shakespearean element to it. There's a family element to it. There is a high-concept fantasy sci-fi vibe to it. But it's also deeply politically charged. It's also deeply ethically and historically charged. And a lot of that's naturally found in Shakespeare. So there's a nice middle ground between all of that creates Black Panther. So Black Panther, again, not a character I ever really cared about. The TV series got me into him, and then I started researching, and then finally I sat down and started reading some Black Panther comics, and I'm going to try and review all the stuff I've read, or at least try and read everything in the best order possible. I went back to the very beginning of this because I found a list of recommended readings for Black Panther so I could go through his history as accurately as possible. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about his first appearances. I didn't think I'd have a lot to say here. I still don't think I have too much to say, but I'll make this point again later, but I think Black Panther is one of those characters, one of those very, very rare characters that knows exactly who he is from moment one. And so that's why I think these are worth talking about. So Black Panther, there's an interesting history there. People always wonder, Eric and I were talking about this earlier, people always kind of wonder, did Black Panther get his name from the Black Panther Party? Did the Black Panther Party have anything to do with the character of Black Panther? What's Black Panther's relationship to 1960s and 70s counterculture media, particularly when you see characters like Spider-Man and Hulk being symbols of that movement, the fact that Captain America was kind of in that vein? How does Black Panther politically fit into that context? So Black Panther predates the formation of the Black Panther Party. The concept of Black Panther as a mascot came well before that. Black Panther being politically charged is always kind of there, but it's there because Stan Lee and Jack Kirby seem to have kind of a more subtle political angle in everything they read. When I reviewed the Captain America comics, I kind of said the same thing, where it seems very clear that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby have some sort of commentary they want to make, and as they keep writing characters, you start to see it uncover more and more, and it's there in Black Panther, but it's not related to, historically, the real Black Panther Party. Black Panther is I think the first main leading black superhero. I know there were sidekicks before that. I know there were like pulp heroes around before this. I know there were books that featured predominantly black characters before this. But as far as like leading role superhero costume wearing black character, I think Black Panther is the first. So he's historically important there, and a lot of what's interesting about Black Panther is about his culture, about Wakanda, about the parallels to African history and his society, the sort of inverse relationship between every African nation and Wakanda. And obviously Wakanda's known for vibranium, and so there's always like a very smart allegory, a very smart parallel between the world's political needs of vibranium and Africa's maintenance of its own culture. If you want to... this is probably not the initial idea, but I think the most modern way to put it is like when you look at how every cell phone needs coltan to run, and we get coltan from smaller African countries, and Wakanda's sort of the same way, where everyone in the Marvel Universe wants vibranium, Wakanda's got it, and so they want to make deals with that country. And so the relationships between us and obtaining coltan, or the Marvel Universe and obtaining vibranium, I think all that's really interesting, and we'll talk more about that when we get more into Black Panther as the star of a book, because this is Fantastic This is Fantastic Four first and foremost. That's a lot of Fs. So they're the stars of these three issues. Black Panther has sort of the spotlight in the second issue, because that's when we get his origin. In the first issue, it's more of an introduction thing. It's more action-driven. And the third issue, he's just kind of there to set up the rest of the storylines for Fantastic Four. Basically what's going on here is the Fantastic Four have gotten a gift from Wakanda of this absolutely fantastic flying machine, and they have no idea where it came from or how it runs and how it operates, and so one of the emissaries of the Black Panther gives it to them, and he tells Reed Richards that you can have this gift as long as you come and meet the Black Panther. And he's like, okay, well, I guess there's no harm in that. And then he pulls out like this communication device, which is basically like a cell phone, but before cell phones, and it's cooler than anything Reed Richards has ever seen before. And immediately you get the sense that Wakanda is way ahead of anyone else in the Marvel Universe, especially when Reed Richards has no idea what these people are using. It's kind of awesome. So Reed agrees, and they go and pick up Johnny, who's bummed about his girlfriend Crystal, who's trapped away in the negative zone with the Inhumans. That's a whole nother thing. We won't really talk about it. You'd have to read Fantastic Four to get all that in context, and I don't have the best working knowledge of all that. This is more about Black Panther than it is about the FF book. So they go to Wakanda, and in Wakanda we see the Black Panther gear up, which, by the way, I love Black Panther's costume. Black Panther has really minute alterations through history of what his costume looks like. I'm not a fan of Black Panther having a cape on his costume. I think when he's like kingly and regal, having a cape is fine, but when he's fighting and in action, I don't think a cape really works. Here he's kind of got it and loses it in whatever scene you're reading, kind of. But it's a really cool costume. The fact that it's all black and it's got these kind of minor details here and there, it is really, really cool. And the way Jack Kirby draws him in action is fantastic, and we'll get to that in a second. So they travel to Wakanda, right in there in the middle of the jungle, and then they get there, and it's this absolutely beautiful, futuristic city like they've never seen. And the most interesting thing about Wakanda is that it's the only country in Africa in the Marvel Universe that has never been conquered. And so Black Panther and Wakandans in general have this extremely deep culture, this extremely consistent culture that comes from living by themselves and advancing by themselves and sort of being the ultimate utopia for most of their existence before the whole superhero boom. And so there's an extreme sense of pride there, and we get into that some more with the second issue when we learn about T'Chaka and what happened to him. So the ship lands with the Fantastic Four, and Black Panther shows up, systematically takes everyone out, and we basically realize that, okay, what happened is Black Panther called the Fantastic Four here to test his skills against them and beat them up, and he apologizes. That's why he gives them the gift, as mostly a friendship thing. It's more of just Black Panther needs to test his skills because he has to take on someone else, and that's when you get into the second issue, which is the origin of Black Panther, the death of his father, and Ulysses Claw. So in the second issue, he explains basically that as a kid, his father, T'Chaka, was the best chieftain, the wisest man, absolutely brilliant tactician, and him and the rest of the Wakandans were attacked by Ulysses Klaue, who was after the vibranium mound that's right next to Wakanda, right in their big mountain. And so, in trying to defend the vibranium, T'Chaka is killed, and T'Challa takes up some arms and starts battling the Klaue and all of his men. He fires this massive blaster weapon twice, and one time he blasts off the Klaue's arm, which is where he gets his claw arm later. And so Wakanda's not conquered, but its people are injured, his father is dead, and they've had their first real brutal altercation with the outside world. And so T'Challa becomes about preservation. T'Challa becomes about understanding the world all around him. He starts educating himself at all the best universities. He sells minuscule amounts of vibranium to people around the world and amasses the largest fortune in the Marvel Universe. And so he spends all this time preparing, and then he takes on the Black Panther mantle as sort of as kind of like a... It's hard to describe. It's more of like in touch with his culture kind of thing. It's basically the Black Panther... I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but the Black Panther costume is symbolic of their godly worship, their deity of the Black Panther as a concept. The whole idea of Black Panthers as a symbol is that it's a feline that, when backed into a corner, it comes out fighting. That it's the ultimate tactician. That it's the ultimate force of resistance in the worst odds. And so that creature being their ultimate symbol, and T'Challa being a character who had to be that force of resistance, that was backed into a corner when his father died and had to come out swinging, which he did. He literally connects with that culture by putting on the Black Panther costume. And from that point, he starts training himself, and he starts getting better, and he starts motivating everyone in Wakanda to improve technology and to improve their society and to be more in touch with them, and again, be more of a paradise than they already are, to be advanced as opposed to complacent because of the face of adversity. And so then the Fantastic Four figure in as being his final test of, okay, all this training, all this time, all this hate for the Klaue, am I ready? And after taking out the Fantastic Four, he concludes that he is. He sort of does it Batman style, where he is able to systematically take down everyone, and he has like a trap ready for everyone. But then the lesson of that at the end of the day is that you don't always have a chance to plan these things far in advance. A lot of what comes in combat comes from being clever and spontaneous in the moment. And so that's when the Black Panther spirit really sort of channels through him. Then basically a giant red gorilla attacks Wakanda, and the Fantastic Four start battling it while Black Panther realizes that it's the Klaue who's come back for the vibranium mound, which he knew was going to happen. It's been 10 years since the Klaue's original defeat, and so he goes and takes out Klaue. And there's a really absolutely amazing fight between Klaue and Black Panther, between the Fantastic Four and this giant gorilla dude. Some of the best things about early Marvel Comics is that Jack Kirby's art is able to tell the story so well. His art is hit or miss for some people. I think the way he draws the Fantastic Four is probably the highlight, at least of his early stuff. There is later things that he does that I think is absolutely gorgeous, but I think here he's really channeling that kinetic power of sequential art. The kind of assumed time movements panel to panel. He really understands how that's supposed to function. And so the action is extremely kinetic, it's extremely visceral, and it's extremely clear, and I really like that. A lot of times with modern action scenes, when you're trying to be too artistic, air quotes artistic, my problem tends to be that it's difficult to tell exactly what the movements are. And with Jack Kirby, that's never a problem. So he has an absolutely fantastic fight with Klaue. He does learn that lesson of sometimes you just have to be able to be clever in the moment. And then he's able to take out Klaue, and Klaue sits inside the negative zone and is absorbing these energies that created these sound creatures in the first place, because they're made of like living sound, whatever that means. And so the Fantastic Four really are glad that they could help the Black Panther. Black Panther is gracious of them helping him after he beats the crap out of them. And then the next issue, 54, is just the conclusion, or the return of some of the stuff that Johnny Storm was dealing with, because his girlfriend's trapped in the negative zone, and so Black Panther gives them a vehicle and transportation away so that they can deal with that issue. And so I won't really talk about issue 54 that much, aside from just that. Overall, this is really good stuff. Black Panther is a character that knows exactly who he is right from page 1. Captain America didn't have that when he returned in the 60s. Iron Man obviously didn't have that. Daredevil didn't have that. Spider-Man kind of did. I'm not a Spider-Man guy, but Dan Torrey will tell you that Spider-Man totally had that. With Black Panther, it's right from the first panel where he arrives. You know this is about culture. You know this is about race relationships. You know this is about exploitation. You know this is about historical parallels to African nations and its connection to the rest of the world. You know exactly what the Black Panther wants to tell you, and you know exactly the right kind of rage that fits with this character, because I've always sort of, in my mind, pictured Black Panther, particularly when you see T'Challa in the Earth's Mightiest Heroes cartoon, as being kind of wise, being kind of laid back, being kind of the calculator, and never losing his cool. But the more things I see with him, the more I read about him, he's a little bit more like Daredevil in that he's kind of got this hot streak. His father was lost to him extremely tragically. His culture is always under attack, and it always survives, but it weighs on him. He became a king at an extremely young age. He had to follow the footsteps of who he thought was the wisest chieftain in their history. So there's definitely lots of anger boiling beneath the surface of this character, and he's trying really hard to be regal, and he's trying really hard to be wise and to be calculating and to be prepared, but then in moments, sometimes the anger just kind of takes over. And here he's extremely patient with how insulting Ben Grimm is to him. He's extremely grateful in the right situations. He knows what people think of him, and he tries his best to preserve his serenity in those moments. But at the same time, he can't deny how he feels about these things, and he can't deny that Seeing Claw may have been a calculated maneuver, but in that moment it's very difficult to contain himself, but he still tries. I think all that's absolutely fantastic, and particularly with the way Jack Kirby's able to draw Black Panther and make his face really expressive and make his body really move like it's a panther. It's one of the most unique character aesthetics, because I say this with Daredevil, where Daredevil's got like a certain type of artistic movement in the right runs, and Black Panther seems to be another character that has that when he's in motion, you can tell there's just something different about him. So I really like this stuff. I think it's absolutely great. It is early 60s comics. If you don't like that overbearing dialogue or descriptions of things that you can clearly see, or the books being action first, and you don't like that kind of older comic mentality, it will be harder for you to get through this. But I think on its own terms, the story is itself absolutely brilliant. The Fantastic Four stuff, it's comics. I mean, people always kind of want to know everything before they go to the next issue. Everyone kind of wants to be a completist. But I think the more you read comics, the more you're just like, I know I'm not going to know everything. If I open this issue and it makes reference to like 80,000 things I've never heard of, that's okay. I'm just going to keep rolling with it until I get to that point where I'm able to follow along completely. And that's no different here. I don't know anything that's going on with the Inhumans or Johnny Storm, and the book does a good job of trying to catch you up on all of that, but at the same time it does that at the expense of having lots and lots and lots of words on each page. But it is all good, and it is all interesting. If you're not a fan of Fantastic Four, that's fine. I think this is a perfectly good introduction to Black Panther. You can probably skip around more in the issue if you're just reading it for the Black Panther parts, but I wouldn't recommend you do that, because the way people like Reed Richards and Ben Grimm talk about the Black Panther is just as important as Black Panther defending himself. So I do recommend these. I do think this is really good. I read this online. I read this with the Comixology app. I don't actually own these issues. They're probably worth a lot, and I should probably get like some sort of essential collection of Black Panther so I can have this and read it again. But it is really good. You can find it online pretty easily. I do recommend it. Thanks everybody for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you are a fan of Black Panther, I'd love to know, and I'd love to get more tips on where to go after this, because I have a very good idea of what I'm going to read for the next few sessions of reviewing Black Panther, but it'd be really great to have people tell me what their favorite ones are, or if there's other things I should be checking out aside from just Black Panther appearances or Black Panther titles. Because I know he was in Jungle Action for a while, and I know that's supposed to be a really big story for him. And I'm trying my best to like figure out Black Panther's history the way I did with Iron Man, but because he didn't start in his own book, it's a little bit more difficult. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.